We got into Germany, I think, before the Germans, no, the Germans capitulated, then we got into Germany. But we were going through France in the direction of the bulge.
Oh, but you weren't in Germany yet?
Not yet, no. And we got very, very serious reports of blowing up. And my lieutenant received a confidential or a secret note saying that if the Germans break through at the bulge, get all your papers, all your secret papers or something, and burn up everything and get the hell out of there. Move fast. And we were prepared to get out with everything. Just move out. Fortunately, they were stopped at the bulge. But it was a very, very sad situation.
Where was the Battle of the Bulge? In Belgium?
I really don't remember the town. I can see it in my eye over here someplace.
With an A. Ardennes?
Ardennes was a forest, I think, in France. I'm not sure. You know, my memory for names is just going. But I met a young man in Paris sometime later when I was on leave. You know, you get a leave every once in a while, like a little vacation for 5 days or 2 days or something. And I got into Paris and I met a kid. I think he came out of the Grand Central Post Office, and he was supposed to be married when he got out of the army, a young man. But he was shaking, and he was at a bar and drinking. And I spoke to him, and he told me a story where he was at the bulge. He said his whole unit was wiped out. They killed them all. And he managed to survive. He doesn't know how he managed to survive, but he did. And so they sent him for rest and rehabilitation to, you know, to regain his self-confidence as a person. They wanted to put him back into the infantry, and he refused to go. They threatened to court-martial him. They put him in jail. They could have him shot. And he said, "You do anything you want. You want to shoot me, shoot me. I don't give a damn, but I will never touch a rifle again. Never." So they sent him to Paris, and then later on they said, "Look, we're not going to ask you to fire any rifles. We're not going to ask you to go into the infantry. All we want you to do is help us out on the firing range where the soldiers were practicing with their rifles. And all you have to do is load the guns, that's all. Load the rifles and give it to them." He refused to do it. He said, "I will never handle a gun again." So I don't know what happened to him, but it was a sad story. And I felt terrible for this young man. I don't know if he ever married or what, but he was really broken. And there are many, many stories.
Than Andy.
What's
Young
that?
kids, probably a little older.
Not
than
much
Andy.
older than Andy, no. And you know, you feel terrible about it because this happened to many, many people. As I said earlier, when we were servicing in the post office, we were servicing many hospitals. And you could see the turnover of people coming back. They'd go out, they'd be butchered, they'd come back. Some soldier would go out, he wouldn't be out 24 hours, he'd be back again with a leg cut off or something. It was a terrible war, really was terrible. And that French invasion was awful. From what I understand, history will reveal someday that our famous American generals and British generals, and maybe even the French generals, they were far from great generals. They made mistakes at some important battles during the war. They were having a party in London. The generals didn't even know that the battle was going on. These are stories we kept hearing, and they're really very sad stories. But everybody thrilled to be like, they talk about Colin Powell, the marvelous general. They want to make a president out of him. And when you begin to ask, yeah, well, Eisenhower, they had complained about Eisenhower delaying. The Russians were furious with him because he took so long to get ready to help them out. And we don't know why Eisenhower did it. They may have done it to weaken the Russians. I don't know. He may have done it that way. We don't know. The only thing I remember about Eisenhower is I got out of the Army wearing an Eisenhower jacket. But, you know, he had tailored a jacket. Everybody liked his jacket. So they gave the soldiers Eisenhower jackets. You know, as a dress uniform. It was a nice jacket.
When you were in Europe, did you know about the concentration camps?
Really, not for a long time. And then as we got into Germany, no, we may have seen it in France too. There were photographic units in the Army. Their sole job was to take pictures for the records, for the history, for the Army, and so forth. And they would take pictures, and a lot of them were up front. And they brought back pictures of some of these camps. We couldn't believe it. We saw pictures of bones laid out like cords of wood, bodies of bone, laid out like wood. You know, you've seen wood. They'd have, say, a row, 6 rows of wood here, then 6 rows this way, and then 6 rows this way. Loads of bodies were laid out just like cords of wood. It was awful. I think there we met the French word, I think it was tondeuse, where the French girls who used to service the German soldiers sexually, when they did that, when the French, once the war was over, the French people got after these women, these young women, and they clipped all their hair off. They shaved all their hair off. They made them look bald, and then they drove them through the streets where everybody scorned them, threw things at them, made fun of them. I don't know what happened to them eventually, but they were held in great contempt. But the French themselves, half of the French government went with the Germans anyhow. They were almost friendly with the Germans. So we didn't have too much of a regard for the French government. But,
tell about VD Day when you were in Europe.
Oh, that was an interesting day. When we heard that the war was over, we were in a little town called St. Nicolas-du-Port, just outside of Nancy, eastern France. And we were so excited. The people got out in the street and they danced all night. It was a wonderful party. I was, as I said earlier, I was living with some French pharmacist, and he brought out the wines that he had concealed from the Germans. He hid them, and we drank wine that night, and they had a wonderful time. He gave me a bottle to take home, which I did. And they sang a song, a part of which I will never forget. It ran, "Ne m'oublie pas quand tu seras bien loin de moi." Do not forget me when you will be far away from me. For many years I tried to get a copy of that song. Even after I came home to the United States, I tried very hard to get a copy of that song. And then finally I located somebody in France who sent it to me. And I had it in my house. Now I don't know what I did with it, and I strongly suspect that it may still be in the file in this den that we have here. I may have it. Someday I'm going to keep looking and see if I can find it. But that song was, "Ne m'oublie pas quand tu seras bien loin de moi." It was a very touching song. They sang it, you know, boys and girls, men and women, children, all night long they were singing that
Did you
song.
ever speak to any survivors of the concentration camps while you were in Europe? Did you meet up with any?
Not really, not really. Our contacts were not that way. I spoke to many Germans. We had Germans working for us in the post office, doing, you know, all the dirty work. They worked in the kitchens,
These were
doing all
prisoners
KP
of
duty.
war?
What's that?
Prisoners of war?
Prisoners of war. It was an interesting thing. Many of them were very young. 17, 18, 19. They're very young soldiers. And they, almost to a man, they all said that Hitler was a terrible, terrible leader. He was terrible. And I asked them, why was he terrible? They said, because he lost the war. They didn't say anything about the things that Hitler did. Never mentioned it. They only said that he was terrible because he lost the war. That was the German mentality at that time. There was a sick nation. The German nation was a sick nation. I don't know if they'll ever get over
It's
it.
hard to visualize these young kids. They're like Andy's age, being at the front,
Yeah.
suffering so.
And they were killed like flies. As fast as they killed them, they would get new ones. Everybody had to work for the Führer, you know, you had to help the leader. It was a...
When you went into Germany, what did the German people tell you about the war years, if anything?
Oh, they didn't know anything about the concentration camps. They didn't know anything about the bad things. They didn't know he was punishing the Jews, none of that stuff. It was, when we passed a town like Heidelberg, I remember a lot of German girls would sit on the fence. The fences, they have pretty heavy fences where you could sit on them. And they wore practically no underclothes, and they exposed themselves to all the American soldiers as they rode by, which was a very tantalizing scene. And we were warned, no fraternizing with the Germans, that you would be court-martialed if they caught you doing it. But of course, you know, that more people did it than were court-martialed. It was, we were experiencing a very interesting thing that practically every town we went through, it may have been bombed or something, but the towns were spotless. They were clean. The German people were the cleanest people we met up to that time. And it was an incredible thing. They would bomb a city, Darmstadt, they'd bomb the city, and the next day the people were out in the street picking up the broken bricks and the debris, putting it on the sidewalk so that the ambulances could come through and pick up the injured. These people out on the farm area, on a farm road, if horses would come by or other animals would come by and would defecate, the lady of the house would run out with a shovel and a pail and pick up the droppings so they would use it as a fertilizer. It's very interesting. I remember one time in East, where we were in St. Nicholas, I was telling you about. We had a young kid from Alabama who was driving the car, and we came to a T in the road during a snowy morning. We came to a T in the road. And this young kid, he was a very careless, reckless kid. He didn't give a damn for anything. He's a kid who used to go out into the forest and shoot baby deer. He loved to shoot baby deer. He was a real rotten kid. And I don't think he was more than about 18 or 19 years old in our army. But anyhow, he was driving our truck one day, and we come to a T in the road. You had to go to the left or to the right. And in front of you was a farmhouse, so you had no choice. So he was going too fast for that kind of a road, and there was ice there and so forth. And he stepped on the brake, intending to stop the truck, but the truck wouldn't stop. And it kept going, and it plowed right into the house. And it cracked a big hole into the house.
You were on the truck?
Yeah, sure. And I was amazed to see all kinds of chickens and pigs and all kinds of animals were inside the farm, in the farmhouse. I was amazed. But that truck created quite a bit of damage. The farmer was screaming in French, and I understood enough French to know that he was furious and that he was going to sue the American government. I understand later that he did collect something for repairing that and for servicing the animals that were killed and the animals that were lost. They escaped. He made up on all of that.